Hi, my name is Mark. This is Ray Pointer, everyone. The author of, you can see right behind him, actually, a copy of, what is it? The Invention and Art of Max Fleischer.
Want to try it again? It's the art and inventions of Max Fleischer, American animation pioneer. Rolls right off the tongue. That's why I'm here.
Let me start by asking you, tell us what the process of restoring these films. Like, are they being hand drawn over, or how are they restored?
Oh, no, 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 no. That would be prohibitively cost prohibitive to do it that way. No, this is done by digital scanning. And the tremendous advantage we have these days is there's so much more that you can do in digital technology than what you used to do in the usual film printing restoration process that they were doing up until the last 20 years. And we can remove scratches, re-register. As a matter of fact, the color cartoons that you saw have been scanned from the original Technicolor negatives. Now, there are a number of advantages to that. For one thing, you are seeing the color as it's never been seen. In fact, it wasn't seen this good 90 years ago. The reason being is because the images have been reconstructed from the original Technicolor negative. And to simplify a technical process, which Technicolor was, there was no such thing as a color negative film until 1947. The color was obtained by a color filtration on black and white film. So in shooting the animation, they would expose a red frame, a green frame, and a blue frame that was filtered by a color wheel. Then Technicolor would extract those alternating frames and make separate negatives corresponding to each primary color. And then Technicolor was a dye transfer process where they would immerse the impressions from each one of those separate color negatives.
Sounds like quite a process.
That's why it was Technicolor.
Technical. Jane is joined us too. Yeah.
Thank you.
Welcome. My next question is, where are these films? Where have they been hiding all these years? Are they like in people's attics, or are they? Does Paramount own them all? Where are they? Where are they?
A good question. That was a question that got me started on this entire endeavor, which is actually when one of our colleagues, Mauricio Alvarado, who's just obsessed with vintage cartoons and with Fleischer cartoons, called me up and said, "Where are the cartoons?" And I said, "I have no idea." And turns out they are, when Fleischer Studios closed in 1942, the cartoons were scattered all over the place. And then over the preceding decades, bought and sold by different companies. But the bottom line is a lot of them ended up with Paramount in the Paramount vault. And then the rest were in different archives all over the world and literally under people's beds, stuck in closets that, were so stuffed they couldn't open them. And together with Mauricio and with Ray helping, we have managed to track down several hundred of them in varying conditions. The bulk of them are with Paramount, and the ones that are in the best condition are usually with Paramount, who managed to preserve them, some of the original camera negatives and some of the original print masters. So it's been quite a search. It's been a lot of fun.
Wow. How many are left to find? Is there ones we think we'll never find?
There are definitely some that I guess never find, or it's going to take a while, that just seem to have fallen off the face of the earth. Ray, you've done like a huge research into what's around and what can be found, haven't you? And in terms of, like in your book, you've got a list of all the titles that I think were ever made.
Right. Well, we have an interesting analogy here in the fact that the materials that are at Paramount, they're sort of like a collection of books. And the trouble of it is that most people are not aware of the fact that Max had a career before and after the sound era. So this is like a collection of library books, and we're trying to locate the bookends. So the bookends would be the silent era, And then the other end of the bookends would be Max's career after Fleischer Studios. And that still covers another decade.
I want to find them.
So do I.
And so do I.
So Jane, you grew up with one. Is your grandfather like? Was his house full of memorabilia and like? This is what I love about Zoom. We get to get a glimpse into people's lives. I can see some both of you have some awesome memorabilia back there. Did he have like a shrine to himself, or afterwards was he more of a wasn't the first one to tell you that he made all these amazing cartoons?
Well, oddly enough, no, there was no shrine. At the time, when the studio closed and for many years thereafter, nobody paid any attention to this. And even, we, the family, we knew that he had done a lot and was important in the world of animation, but nobody really thought to collect his memorabilia. In fact, when the studio closed, a lot of the paperwork and documentation was burned and lost. And back in those days too, I think, Ray, you can address this. People just, like with the cells and stuff, they just erased them and used them again for something else. So a lot of the material was lost.
That's right. That's one of the reasons why a Betty Boop cell is practically non-existent. There are some of Popeye and some from a few of the color classics, but for the most part, you cannot find an authentic period Betty Boop cell because they were washed off and reused.
Oh, do you have one, Ray?
No.
Oh, wow.
Actually, I'm not a collector. I know what I'm looking at. Besides that, I probably was one of the last generation that was trained in the old studio system where you learned every job. And so I inked and painted enough cells to satisfy me for a lifetime.
I have so many questions. Here's the models for like the stereo optical, and are any of those kept, or were they all thrown away? Like,
no. That question comes up quite a lot, and I've identified reuses maybe on 4 occasions where they might have used some of the elements again, but for the most part, the prime example would be Play Safe, if you're familiar with that one. That's the one about the kid that has the dream in the railroad roundhouse.
Oh, yeah.
And that has a 3D background of the roundhouse scene. And I have the stills in the book of the paper mache before they had painted over the locomotives and everything like that. But as soon as those were finished and then the prints were okayed, most of that stuff was discarded because if you think about it, it becomes a storage problem.
Yeah.
And a lot of those sets were unique to the situation. I mean, why would they anticipate reusing another railroad roundhouse set,
Yeah, and who knew some geek 100 years later would really want one?
Now, what's funny about that is there's somebody online who really likes that cartoon, and they came up with replicas of that locomotive.
That's crazy. Hey, I got a lot of there's a couple pen heads in here. Can you tell us about the ink? Like, how much ink was there just barrels of ink everywhere? How much ink did it take just to make one of these films?
Oh, I couldn't tell you that, because the thing of it is that people were just so concentrated on trying to get the work done that's a minute detail nobody paid any attention to. But at that time, things were cheap anyway. And so you would just buy it in bulk. But I'd take a guess and to say probably an average bottle of ink would probably last for maybe 200 cells, depending on how intricate the inking might have been.
What about the pens? Is there any of those surviving? I know that's a good question, but
no, those wouldn't have survived. They might have reused them or something like that, but that's gone by the wayside too.
Okay.
As a matter of fact, that's sort of a lost art, because a lot of the kids that are trying to revise cell animation, they try to do it with rapidograph pens, and you don't get the same quality of line.
There's so much the contents, the films stand out. The legacy is like, how Disney has Mickey and the Warner Brothers, but without the legacy's been so strong. Like, it's so inventive and it stands for itself. Why did we lose that in like that 70s or 80s? Why Why isn't Coco and why isn't Bimbo a household name?
Well, first of all, a lot of that you can blame on the emergence of color television and the fact that when these films were first sold to television, I was the first generation that saw them on television. So they were first sold to television in 1955. I was 3 years old. So I was about 3 or 4 when I first saw them. I hadn't quite started school yet. And Popeye went on the air in 56 just before I started school. So I saw them when they were on television the first time around. So that was their second cycle. And the cartoons really had about maybe a 2-year life theatrically. And fortunately, they saved them. They didn't burn the negatives because they foresaw the value of the coming of television. So that's what saved them in that respect. But by the time newer product was in demand, and especially in color, these things were off the airwaves. And also due to the fact that the original licensing was for 7 years. So after 7 years, you're getting up to about 1964. And right around the corner is color television. In fact, it already existed. So the fact that the majority of the Fleischer product was in black and white, it was considered dated and there was no interest in black and white cartoons.
The old VHS tapes I used to rent in the early 90s, were they illegal?
Well, it depended because an awful lot of this stuff had fallen into the public domain. As a matter of fact, with the exception of 1 or 2 titles, the majority of the Fleischer color product was in the public domain. And the reason being is because the television companies that had the television rights failed to renew the copyrights between 1962 and 1965, when the 28th year first term expired. So that explains that. And then the Betty Boop cartoons after 1936 all fell into the public domain for the same reason.
Wow, you know your stuff.
And then 20 years ago, I released a 2 DVD set of the Out of the Inkwell films, 60 of the 90 that were made in the best condition that I could get a hold of at that time. And we've since done better.
Are they being restored right now? Like, is it a constant? Is there one being worked on right now?
We have some of the Out of the Inkwells that have been restored. The best ones, of course, are in the Paramount Group under the title The Inkwell Imps, which was the rechristened Out of the Inkwell series. But to find a 35 of the Out of the Inkwells before 1927, extremely rare. And we found 3. And to find one from the Bray period from 1920 or 21 is extremely rare. And we have 2 of those.
We're also, actually, you asked in progress right now. We have requested and are getting another Betty Boop now, which is called No, No, 1,000 Times No. Let's guess what that's about. 1935 animation. So hopefully we'll have another Betty Boop soon, and I can tell you how many Bettys we've restored. Let me just get that information pulled up here. But we have restored several so far, so we and hope for more.
Oh, wonderful. So there will be a volume 3 coming.
So what?
There will be a volume 3, a best of 3.
Yeah, you bet.
Well, we're entering our 4th year now.
Yep. Yeah, and we, for really started restoring these, more or less full time 2 years ago. So we've made tremendous progress in getting the restorations done.
And to go back on one of the earlier questions too, one of the reasons why these look so good is because you are seeing the image off from an original camera negative, which is the first generation. And people who see them in the theaters, of course, they don't know the difference, but actually what you're seeing in a distribution print is 3 generations removed.
Yeah.
The other thing too is the fact that the presentation is not a projected image with a shutter changing between frames. So the image is actually held still and the digital pixels are changing. So you don't have the shutter that's changing the image. So that's another reason why you're seeing it sharper than you would see it projected.
Oh, the man I was sitting next to said during the color one, he's like, "Oh, the one I saw, I didn't know there was anything behind the waterfall."
Yeah. Yeah, that's the advantage of being able to go back to these negatives because there are just so many subtleties that are missed in all of those other copies. The other thing too is the subtleties in the color is possible with our technology now.
It's popping.
I just looked it up. We've restored 25 Betty Boops so far, and that doesn't include where she appears in the Talk Cartoon series. So we've probably got 30 or 40 cartoons with Betty Boop in it restored so far.
Wow, I want more. Uh, can you? I don't want to take up. We're going to see if anyone has any questions, but can you, Jane? Did you ever get to see the studio in person, or were you around while they were making any of these?
No, not at all. The studio closed in 42, and I was born about a decade later, so I didn't get to see any of it. But then, the studio, the building still exists. I was down in Miami, several months ago, and it's Ray, what is it now? It's like a police station.
It's a police training center now.
Yeah.
Crazy.
And at one time, Pan Am used it for a training center because it's just down the road from the Miami airport.
Okay, that's on my list.
Mhm.
I don't know if
I was in the building where the New York studio was before it was torn down. That was the Studebaker building. And so they were in that building from 1925 until 1937, 38, and then they moved to Miami in the middle of 1938.
Yeah, and the Studebaker building now is, isn't it? It's the M&M building.
That's the M&M building
in
now.
New York.
Right, that's good to know too.
It's in the heart of Times Square.
Yeah.
So any of those older movies, when you always saw that stock shot of Times Square where there's the Planters or Chevrolet billboard at that triangular block that meets in the middle, well, there's this brownish building that's right behind that billboard. That's that building.
That is so cool. When they moved to Florida, and this is maybe a real weird animation question, but they had more money, obviously. Like it looks, the new Supermans or at the time the Supermans were so kind of different than what they were doing before. Did they completely change their pipeline, or like did they know what they were planning to do, or did they just jump into it? Well, I guess
there's an interesting story about that. And fortunately, I had access to internal documents that set aside a lot of myths that were rather incredible, because it's always been said that Paramount sprung for spending $90,000 on those cartoons. That's impossible. Even in $1940, they would not spend that much money because, for one thing, Fleischer's main problem with Paramount was they didn't give them enough money to work with in the first place. A Popeye cartoon by 1940-41 would have cost $16,500, and their color cartoons cost in the average of about $56,000. So the first Superman, according to their contract, was produced at 56, and then the subsequent cartoons after that at 30. And they were able to make up that difference by reprinting the intro.
Wow. That's Hollywood accounting. Did I would ask? Okay, I know there's maybe some other questions. One more. I want to ask about Dave Fleischer, because we don't really hear as much about him. It's a lot about Max, and he must have been there directly.
Interestingly, I did a piece on him, so maybe at some future date we might be able to schedule something around him. But go ahead with your question, and I'll tell you what you need to know right now.
I mean, just tell us what we need to know. You start.
For right now. Well, what did you want to know?
Well, I just he was there the whole time. I mean, Max was the inventor and stuff, but his name's always there, and I just want to know more about him.
Well, the main reason is because they were equal partners. And they both started out at Bray. And then when Bray was getting into trouble in 1921, a lot of their people all left there in 1921 because Bray was involved with all these lawsuits, which stifled their ability to make technical advancements. And Max had these ideas about making the techniques better. And so one of the first things that they did was to strike out on their own. Now, the legend has it that since Dave was known to be a gambler on the horses, he won $50,000 in a horse race, and so contributed 50% of them going into their own studio in 1921. And one of the first things that Max did when they left was to improve on the compositing of live action footage with the animation. Because at the Bray studio, how they did it was they made 8x10 still blow-ups off in the 35 millimeter negative and then registered them behind the cells. And so it wasn't really that accurate because even as careful as you could be with it, they still wiggled around. And it was not very cost effective. And so Max came up with a rear projection method called the rotograph, which was later known as aerial image photography, where you can rephotograph the live action composited with your animation by laying over it as a backlit image and then rewinding the film and then reshooting the cells top lit in the same order. And you have an in the camera matte to composite the animation with the live action.
Did Max keep inventing after the studio closed down? Was he always inventing?
Yeah,
Yes. He was still working on that clock, I think, when you came along, Jane, right?
Yeah, that's right. We have a picture of it. He wanted to make a never wind clock, which I think he succeeded in doing kind of as a prototype. I don't, it never got produced, but he was always looking, trying to invent things or create new things. I remember as a kid, we had a family dog who was a mutt named Harry, and Harry was kind of a mid-sized dog and a complete terror. And the dog managed to break his tail somehow. And my grandfather sent us a picture of a contraption that he made so that Harry's tail could be held on wheels as he walked around. So he was always doing that kind
It
of
was
stuff.
sort of like a little cart-like thing, right?
Yes, it was a little cart-like thing. So he was always fiddling around with stuff.
Cool. Okay, I gotta see if anyone has any questions here. Got one right here. Wait, there's a microphone, isn't there? Or oh, you got it. There, let's I guess you're.
I got legs. Hello.
Tap it. You're good. Yeah.
What an honor to meet you. I just wondered what it was like having a grandpa who was such a great cartoonist. Was he always drawing? Was he always illustrating? Did he sit down with you and draw with you?
He, not with me, but my cousin Ginny, who is about 10 to 15 years older than me, went and lived with Max for a period of time. Her brothers had polio, and it
Her
was
sons. Her
yeah,
brothers,
that's
brothers,
right.
yeah.
It was her brothers. Yeah, it was.
Yeah.
Max had a daughter named Ruth, and Ruth's sons. She had two of them. Both got polio at the same time, and Ginny went to live with Max and Essie, and we have some clips of her. He would show her how to draw. She's an artist herself, and teach her technique, show her how to shade and make shadows and make things look like 3D. And he would also write her little notes. Like Ginny was a very small, skinny little thing. And he would like give her awards for eating her dinner. And she still has them. And, congratulations, Ginny. So yes, and even for us, he would always like with the dog that broke his tail, he would send us little drawings, and like we moved to Europe when I was a kid and I had no idea where Europe was. So he drew me a little picture of the US and then where, it's like those Steinberg maps and Europe and how far away we were going to be from each other. So, and he started drawing, as a child. He was fascinated with mechanical stuff and industrial stuff. And so we have some early notebooks when he was a child, and he was drawing, shoes and tea kettles and things like that.
Guns, clocks.
Clocks, big on clocks. So yeah, he was always drawing and inventing.
That was also the reason why he went to Detroit and Jam Handy. They wanted him for his research and development abilities because they had a lot of government contracts during the war. And a side note is that 58 years ago, I had my job interview there. That was my introduction to the animation profession. And Max happened to stop by there to see friends. And that's really the beginning of my research. And so when I started asking around at Jam Handy what Max did there, I just about got my head bitten off. Fortunately, I grew another one. But the reason being is because it was classified material that he was working on. But by that time, that wasn't really classified. But what I understood was things like sighting systems for bombers and things of that nature, because he was very astute about optics, cameras and lenses and things of that nature. And so that was his value in that respect.
Well, Ray, he also made World War I training films, right?
That's correct. Some of
Yeah.
the first ones. As a matter of fact, some of them were reissued in World War II. And I found one of the reissues about the reading the contour map. And I had the stills of them in production. And I happened to luck out and found the reissue of that same footage.
Any other? Thank you. Any other questions? We got a couple over there.
Jane, you said that this journey started by someone asking you where the old films were. I was wondering if either of you could tell us what made you decide to essentially recomposite all of these films frame by frame.
Well, first of all, it just in general, as we were looking for the films, I realized, there was no one place to find them. This is somebody who was a pioneer in the animation industry. He made all kinds of inventions and created, iconic characters, and there was no one place you could go to where there is a library of his work. So that's what got me started. And then as I was finding the cartoons, most of them were kind of really crappy copies on YouTube. Between Mauricio and Ray, they kind of pounded into my brain that these could be made better. They can be restored. And as I started looking into that with their help, I found I didn't know what restoration was. 5 years ago, I did not have a clue about any of this stuff. I, thought restoration was, well, you fiddle with the color for a little bit on iMovie. I learned that, there's actually experts and careers that are made with this. And I was introduced to our restorer, or one of several restorers, Thad Komorowski, who's done most of the restoration for us so far, and really learned from him um, what restoration was about, which is going frame by frame, looking at, there's some AI in the programs that we use, but then you have to go frame by frame and put back the stuff that AI ate up in the wrong kind of way. And um, and do a lot of personalized eye work, looking at, does this frame look right? Does it match the frame before it and the frame after it? And what came out was so beautiful and so astounding and so different from what I was seeing out there in the general public that there was no choice. This had to get done to the best of our ability with as many films as we can do.
And another thing too is the goal is to restore them to their original theatrical presentation and get rid of those ugly TV intros,
Yeah.
and to put the Paramount heads and tails back on. And in the case of the screen songs, a lot of them had a lot of interesting optical effects and kaleidoscopic effects behind the titles that were ruined when they made the TV title and put the UM&M copyright line and did it on a still frame.
Mm-hmm. And it's hard to find for some of these. It's not as easy as you'd think, because, for instance, Paramount changed its logo every couple of years and had different logos for different kinds of film. So it might be different for a feature than it was for a cartoon. So we're still looking for the right logos for the right cartoons. So there, we still have a bunch where the best we can do at the moment is we still have UM&M stuck on there, but we will get rid of it.
And an interesting thing too is the cartoons between 32 and 34. They had a unique ending at the end of the cartoons where there's an iris down to an overturned ink bottle. It turns over and the stopper goes in and it forms the impression of the Paramount logo.
Yeah. There was some wonderful stuff in those days that's, we're trying to bring back.
Cool. Anyone else with the question? I think you did, sir.
Hello. I was just wondering, you mentioned that there were varying degrees of like quality that these were found in and like closer to the original state and whatnot. Those would obviously be more valuable towards your work. But are there any particular cartoons that you have found, regardless of the condition, that you consider almost like a holy grail of sorts, and like this, like, oh yeah, this is like the best one we found, or maybe one that you're still hoping to find?
Well,
Anything like
to answer you directly, one of the ones I was referring to from the Brave period, the Clown's Little Brother in 35 millimeter. That's from 1920. And so to find anything 100 years ago in 35 millimeter that hasn't deteriorated is a great find. Now, we had one or two of the others in 35. I think Bubbles was one that comes to mind, and it was just too deteriorated.
Right. And there is one holy grail for me also. I'll have to look up the date unless you know it off the top of your head, Ray. It's called Claytown.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
it was
that's another one.
cartoon with Coco. And see if I can get the thing. It was the sets and a lot of the action. It's claymation. They sculpted the sets for this. And I've seen some frames that are at least good enough, that are just phenomenal. I mean, it's just artwork is what it is that they turned into a cartoon.
The saving grace on that is the deterioration is on the outside edges. So if you just block that out like you've got blinders on, like a horse, and just try to focus on the center, you can still see it very well.
Okay. So everyone look under your beds for Claytown.
Yeah, please.
But that's significant too, because it's probably one of the earliest extensive uses of claymation. And one of the things that I brought up at one of our other screenings is that one of the things that made the Out of the Inkwell series so much fun is that they were not afraid to use experimental film techniques at a time when people were not doing it. There's pixelation, there's stop motion, there's cutouts, there's claymation. They did that several times.
Mm-hmm.
So it just wasn't stuck with cell animation or inking on paper.
How many short
It's sometimes animated sand.
Yeah. So you just know these different styles. How many were they putting out a year? And in their peak?
Oh boy.
Well, in the silent days, that's kind of hard to tell, but basically they had one release a month. And then when you get into the Paramount period, of course, then the studio expanded. And so they would have a new cartoon every 2 weeks. And then as they got bigger, they eventually had a new cartoon every week. And so by their zenith, by the middle of the decade, they were producing 52 cartoons a year.
That's nuts. How many employees did they have? How many animators?
Between 600 and 800 employees.
Okay, that makes a little more sense.
And then when they were in Miami at their peak, they had 1,200 employees.
Mm. And they started with, I think, two. It was Max and Dave.
Well, actually, it was
And-
three because they brought Charlie Shetler in. He was a friend of Dave's. Charlie was the cameraman,
Mm-hmm.
and then in 23, Dick Humer came over, and Dick Humer was the one who really set the Fleischer style, and he was the one who really defined the clown as Coco the Clown. Previous to that, the clown had no name. And the evidence in that is in the history of the titles, because before 1923, you don't see any reference to the clown's name.
It's the clown's little brother, the clown's pup, things like that.
Yeah,
And
but having that name Coco, then you've got the chance for alliteration titles that are puns. Coco's cake, Coco's queen,
right.
Coco's kick.
There's a lot of those, and a lot of puns in there too.
Yeah, so many gags. Another question here.
I was wondering where the digital files are being preserved now and if they're going to be accessible to the public.
The short answer is ultimately yes, they will be accessible to the public. Part of the purpose is to get things restored and then to house them somewhere that anybody can access them. Either the academy or a university somewhere. And right now they're stored in several computers between myself and our restoration guy and Mauricio, who does our presentations. We have everything backed up on various hard drives and clouds all over the place.
I
And
will add too that when UCLA inherited Paramount's negatives, they started the restoration process in 1980. Now that's a long time ago. And the first one they restored was Poor Cinderella. And so I saw the first answer print on that. That was in 1980.
Mhm.
And then a few years later, they restored Dancing on the Moon. But we can't wait 20 years for them to do one cartoon. We're at the 11th hour.
Yeah, a lot of these are deteriorating all over the place, and especially the Color Classic series, which is one of the first all color series, or the first that Fleischer Studios made. And we're trying to pull them out of Paramount as fast as we can to get the color restored before it's really a mess. And they are, again, phenomenal when you see the original colors. They're just gorgeous.
Amazing. Okay, there was another question here, and
Hey, so like 50 plus years later, I'll watch these cartoons and just still wonder, like, how do those stereo optical shots look so good? How much work went into building those sets?
Quite a bit. It was actually an extension of the background department. In fact, once they got used to what they were doing, within the first year, it was kind of jarring because you could see the difference between the painted flat backgrounds, and then suddenly there's this jarring switch to the 3D backgrounds, but eventually they got them harmonious. And probably the best example of that is the Popeye Sinbad special.
That's my favorite one. Yeah. Thank you.
Great. Any more questions? Quick now. Well, one more in the back. Feel like we should be wrapping up soon. Not sure. I want to be. Hey, how's the weather today? Are you in LA?
Neither of us are in LA. I'm in Oakland. So
I'm
that's
in Auburn Hills, Michigan.
Oh wow. Okay.
I'm just west of Lake Huron.
All right.
So we have no idea about LA. We on LA.
At least I have fresh air here.
Oh, shut up.
Just a quick question about the music that's often used in these films.
Did I hear a question about music?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Just a question about the music. It seems like there was a lot of contemporary musicians like Louis Armstrong and Cab Calloway in some of these films, and there's that amazing sequence with Cab Calloway dancing in one of those films. What was the relationship with the studio and these musicians and?
Well, first of all, those jazz cartoons were the result of Lou Fleischer's influence because he was a big jazz aficionado, and he frequented the Cotton Club quite often, and he became friendly with Cab Calloway. So that's how that came about. But actually, there were only 5 of those jazz cartoons made. And then the question is, why didn't they make more? Part of that had to do with the influence of the production code because they stopped making them in 1934.
It was too risque, or what was the issue?
Yeah, well, there was sort of an undercurrent about the fact that the jazz scene had an underworld connection with drug addiction and various deviant activities and things of that nature.
Like Betty Boop's garter. And also that's what switched, it was the what's referred to as a Hayes Code, but it was really the Breen Code enforced by Hayes, which was started to be enforced around 34, which really changed Betty Boop from her sexy, low cut dress and little garter and stuff. And she was designed to be Bimbo's girlfriend. And the Breen Code decided that bestiality was insinuated and inappropriate. And so
Gee whiz, this is just a cartoon. And second of all, Bimbo is not a realistic dog. And the key to this thing is what they don't get is that these anthropomorphic characters are symbolic humans.
Yes. And Bimbo was a cigar chomping, lecherous kind of character. And so they swapped out Bimbo and gave Betty Boop Pudgy, the cute little, puppy, as her sidekick instead. So we have the Hayes Code or Breen Code to thank for that.
Well, on the other hand, too, in my research, some of the parents were complaining, though, about the cartoons, some of the content of some of those cartoons around 1930 or 31, and the exhibitors were a little bit nervous about that, too. So that comes into it as well.
Yeah. One of the films I just want to mention that I think you're going to see tonight, which is Coco's Earth Control. Yeah, it should be on your playlist. Was just admitted to the National Film Registry at the Library of Congress, which only admits a handful of films a year. And so that was really a special honor that in 2025 they admitted Coco's Earth Control to the registry.
So far, we've got about 3 or 4 that are in the National Archives. Snow White is there.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure if Popeye Meets Sinbad is, but it should be. And the reason why I say that is because it was a milestone that the industry bypassed. And in my book, I bring up the point that even though it lost the Oscar to Disney's Country Cousin, Paramount didn't promote it properly because it was pioneering the longer format animated cartoon. So it came out a year before Disney's Snow White. So it pioneered the lead into features.
Right. It's 17 minutes, and yes, it was added to the National Film Registry in 2004, according to AI. So it may not be accurate.
Well, it should have been.
Yeah, if it wasn't, it should have been.
But if Paramount had really been aware of what they were doing, they could have petitioned for a special achievement award for the longer format animated film, but they didn't do it. They were naive to think that because they had color cartoons, they could compete with Disney. Well, we know better.
Okay, if there's no more questions, I have one more question for you both. How can we get the word out? What can we do to help this restoration process?
Oh, so many things. First of all, tell a friend. Talk to your venues and get them out. Follow us at Fleischer Tunes. Go to our website, which is www.fleischertunes.com. Donate. And ask your friends to ask their local venues to put on shows and contact us to get a show set up.
And if you want more information, look for my book.
Yes, absolutely. And that's why, I mean, we're so thrilled to be in Canada, to be in Halifax, which is a first. I mean, this is really terrific.
And let me tell you, by the way, I saw the Popeye cartoons on CKLW in Windsor.
Wicked. Amazing. Well, we hope to have you back, and thank you so much for joining us here. How about another round of applause?
Thank you. And back at you. Thank you for showing our films.
Well, we're
And
gonna
thank you for having us.
we are very grateful for it, and we're gonna take a quick break, and then we're gonna watch some Superman.
Cool.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. If you haven't got a ticket to the second session, you can just pay the
Thank
difference.
you.
It's $3. You want to stay. If you haven't got a ticket to the second session already.
Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. It
Thank
was a
you.
pleasure.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.